The Wyoming high country was a place that swallowed sound and memory alike. To Eli Walker, it was the only medicine he knew for the kind of wounds no doctor could mend. The year was 1874. The war had been over for almost 10 years, but in Eli's quiet valley, the ghosts still marched beside him in the wind. His cabin stood alone near the Wind River, a squat, sturdy thing made of hand-cut logs, pressed against a wall of tall pines. He had built it himself, board by board, a fortress for one man and his silence. Eli was tall and lean, with a face carved by the sun and a pair of eyes the color of a gathering storm. His hands were hard and scarred, the hands of a man who had once fought for the Union and now fought only to forget. He worked as a ranch hand for a cattleman a half-day's ride away. The job paid little, but it bought him what mattered most: solitude. The folks in Lander called him that quiet Yankee. They didn't trust him, and he didn't care. He had seen what blind belief could do to men. He'd seen brothers kill brothers in the name of glory. Now he lived by a simpler creed: no promises, no people, no pain. That spring had been cruel. Even in June, the snowmelt poured down from the peaks like punishment. The Wind River, usually a clear blue ribbon through the valley, had turned into a monster. It roared and frothed, chewing through its banks, tearing away earth and roots, as if trying to swallow the whole mountain. Eli was checking his horse's shoes that morning, the rasp steady in his calloused hand, when he heard it, a sound that did not belong to the wilderness. It came faint at first, a thin cry carried by the wind. Then it came again, sharper this time, filled with terror. A woman's voice. The rasp dropped from his hand. His head snapped toward the river. For a heartbeat, he thought he had imagined it, just another ghost from a war that still stalked his dreams. But then, it came again, swallowed almost instantly by the river's roar. He was running before his mind could catch up, boots pounding the earth, heart slamming in his chest. The roar of the river grew louder until it was all he could hear. Then he saw her, a flash of dark fabric tangled in the broken limbs of a fallen cottonwood that the flood had dragged downstream. Pale hands clung to the slick branches, her body thrashing helplessly in the current. Eli didn't think. He moved like a man possessed. He kicked off his boots, stripped off his gun belt, and dove into the freezing water. The shock was brutal. The cold hit him like a hammer, stealing his breath and driving needles into his skin. The current caught him instantly, yanking him sideways with terrifying strength. He fought it, his arms slicing through the icy water, his eyes locked on the woman. She was caught halfway between life and death, her head barely above the surface. A log slammed into his shoulder, but he pushed on, every muscle straining against the pull of the river. When he finally reached the fallen tree, he grabbed a thick branch, anchoring himself. "Hold on," he shouted, his voice raw over the roar of the flood. She didn't answer. Her eyes were closed, her face pale as bone, lips blue from the cold. One arm hung limp in the water. Her leg was wedged deep beneath the branches. He filled his lungs and dove beneath the surface. The world went black and wild. He groped blindly through the tangle of wood, his hands raw and scraped, until he found her leg and wrenched it free. His lungs burned as he fought his way back up, dragging her with him. When they broke the surface, she was nothing but dead weight in his arms. He kicked and clawed his way toward the shore, every stroke a battle against the river's strength. His vision dimmed around the edges, his muscles screaming, but finally, mercifully, his feet found solid ground. He hauled her onto the muddy bank and collapsed beside her, gasping for breath. The river thundered past, uncaring, carrying branches and roots, and the remnants of spring away with it. Eli rolled onto his side and pressed trembling fingers to the woman's throat. There, a pulse, faint, but there. A second later she coughed, a harsh, ragged sound, and river water spilled from her lips. Her eyes fluttered open, green eyes, the soft color of moss, clouded with confusion and fear. "You're safe," Eli said, his voice hoarse. "Easy now." She tried to sit up, her body shaking so hard she could barely move. Her dress clung to her like a second skin, torn at the shoulder and soaked through. When she realized her state, she pulled her arms across her chest, shivering. Where am I?" she whispered through chattering teeth. "Wind River," he said simply. "My cabin's close. You'll freeze out here." He reached out to help her, but she flinched, scooting back in the mud like a frightened doe. "No, please, don't take me to town." Her voice cracked on the words, filled with a raw panic that made him pause. "I ain't taking you to town," he said gruffly, "but you won't last long in this cold." She hesitated, her eyes darting to the river, then back to him. Something in his face, maybe the quiet steadiness of it, seemed to convince her. She gave a small nod. When she tried to stand, her legs gave out. Without a word, Eli lifted her into his arms. She was light, fragile in a way that felt wrong to him, as if the world had already taken too much from her. He carried her through the pines toward the thin column of smoke rising from his chimney. The cabin door creaked as he shouldered it open. Inside was small but warm, the smell of wood smoke and coffee filling the air. He set her gently in a chair by the fire. "Get those wet things off," he said, turning away to add wood to the flames. His voice was firm, practical, the voice of a man used to being obeyed. Behind him, he heard the rustle of fabric, the soft tremor of teeth chattering. He poured coffee, added a shot of whiskey, and set the cup near her hand. She didn't speak for a long time. The only sound was the fire's crackle. Then, in a small, strained voice, she said, "Thank you." He looked at her then, wrapped in his spare blanket, her wet hair tangled around her bruised face. Her eyes, still wary, met his across the firelight. "My name's Eli Walker," he said quietly. She hesitated, then whispered, "Clara Jensen." And in that tiny cabin, surrounded by wind and flame, two broken lives, one running from the past, one hiding from it, met for the first time. The fire in Eli Walker's cabin crackled low, the flames throwing soft gold light across the walls. Outside, the river still roared like a caged beast, but inside, the world had gone quiet, too quiet. Clara Jensen sat wrapped in his wool blanket, her hair still damp, her face pale but composed. Eli moved about the room, his every motion steady, deliberate, as though afraid any sudden noise might make her vanish. "You should eat," he said, placing a tin plate of beans and bacon on the table. She shook her head. "I can't." Her voice was soft, almost apologetic. "You nearly drowned. You'll eat." His tone was gruff, but there was no anger in it. He just wasn't used to company, especially not the kind that looked at him with those wide, frightened eyes. Clara hesitated, then picked up the fork. She ate slowly, as though remembering how. Every bite seemed to thaw a bit of the ice that clung to her. When she was done, she whispered, "Thank you." Eli nodded and turned toward the window. The rain had begun again, light but steady. The cabin would hold, but the river would not go down for days. They were trapped together until then. Behind him, Clara's voice broke the silence. "I'm sorry if I'm an inconvenience." "You're not," he said, though the truth was he didn't know what to call her presence. He had built this place to be alone. Now every sound, her soft movements, the creak of the chair, made the air feel different, warmer, alive. "You can rest on the cot," he said after a moment. "I'll take the floor." Her eyes flickered with surprise. "You don't have to." "I do," he interrupted. "You've been through enough." He laid out his bedroll by the fire. She murmured something like gratitude, her voice fading as exhaustion claimed her. When she finally slept, he lay awake, staring at the glowing embers. He could hear her breathing, uneven at first, then deep and steady. He closed his eyes, but peace didn't come easily. Too many nights alone had made him forget the sound of another soul sleeping close by. Near midnight, he heard her move. A faint rustle, then her voice. Barely a whisper. "Mr. Walker?" Quote. He didn't turn. "What is it?" Quote. Her paws stretched long and trembling. "The shirt," she said. "The one from the war." "Is it clean?" He frowned into the dark. "It is." Another silence. Then she said, her voice breaking on every word, "Will you stay if I undress?" Eli froze, The words hit him like a gunshot. For a long moment, the only sound was the fire's hiss. He understood her meaning, not as desire, but as desperation. She wasn't offering herself out of want. It was gratitude. Fear. The kind of bargain a woman made when the world had taught her kindness always carried a price. His jaw tightened. Shame burned in his chest. Not for her, but for every man who'd ever made her believe her body was all she had left to give. Slowly, he turned his face toward the wall, away from her trembling voice. "Get some sleep, Mrs. Jensen," he said roughly. "No one's going to bother you here." She didn't answer. Only a soft, broken sound escaped her, a quiet sob swallowed by the dark. Eli lay there for hours, listening to the wind outside and the uneven rhythm of her weeping. It was the sound of someone who had carried pain far too long. Somewhere deep inside, something old and frozen cracked open in him, a small, painful thaw. When dawn came, pale light slipping through the cracks of the cabin walls, Eli was already at the stove brewing coffee. The smell filled the air, warm and familiar. Clara stirred on the cot, her eyes red and weary. She sat up, pulling the blanket tighter around her. "The river's still high," he said, pouring 2 cups. "We'll be stuck a few days." She nodded, her voice hoarse. "That's fine." He studied her for a moment, then said quietly, "You got folks somewhere?" Her gaze dropped to the floor. No one. He didn't press her. Instead, he handed her a cup. "Drink this." The days that followed passed in uneasy rhythm. The river kept them prisoner, and the cabin became their small shared world. Clara refused to sit idle. By the second day, she was outside, limp and all, pulling weeds in the little vegetable patch. "You don't have to do that," Eli said. "It's better than sitting," she replied, not looking up. "I'd rather be useful." So he let her be. They worked in silence, each finding comfort in small labors. The chopping of wood, the mending of clothes, the smell of stew simmering on the fire. The loneliness that had once been his armor now began to feel like a wound. On the 3rd morning, he caught her standing by the wash line, her dress pulled slightly aside as she hung a shirt. For a moment, his breath stopped. Across her back were faint, silver scars, old and thin, like lines drawn by lightning. He looked away quickly, his jaw clenching, fury rising, not at her, but at the world that had carved those marks into her skin. Later that day, she sat by the fire, a small silver locket turning in her fingers. She didn't notice him watching. Her shoulders shook with quiet sobs she tried to hide. Inside that locket, he knew, was the heart of her sorrow. But he didn't ask. Some truths didn't need to be spoken to be understood. When a knock came on the 4th morning, it startled them both. Eli stepped outside to see Jed, a ranch hand from the main spread, riding up. "Walker," Jed called, tipping his hat. "Heard the river took half the bridge. You still breathing?" Eli grunted. "Barely." Jed's gaze shifted to the cabin window, where Clara stood half-hidden. His eyebrows rose. "Didn't know you kept company out here." "She's a traveler," Eli said, his tone sharp. Jed smirked but lowered his voice. "Name's going around town. Widow Jensen, they're saying. Her husband's dead. Killed over cards. Left debts behind. Folks say she ran off with his money." Eli's jaw set. "Folks should mind their own business." "Maybe," Jed said, swinging onto his horse, "but gossip rides faster than truth. Watch yourself, Walker." When Eli turned back toward the cabin, Clara was standing in the doorway, pale as a ghost. "It's true," she said softly. "What he told you." Eli waited, silent. "My husband," she said, her voice shaking. "He died in a fight, owed men more than he ever had. They came after me. Said I had 3 days to leave the land. I rode all night, the river. It was dark. My horse panicked." She swallowed hard, staring into the fire. "He never filed the marriage papers. I wasn't his wife, not in the eyes of the law. When he died, I became nothing." Eli's voice was low. "You're not nothing." She looked up, tears glinting in her green eyes. "Then what am I?" He didn't answer. He didn't know how. So he just sat beside her in silence, the only sound, the crackle of the fire, and the distant, fading growl of the river. Outside, the storm was ending. Inside, another one had just begun. The morning came quiet after days of wind and rain. The sky above the Wyoming valley was pale and washed clean, the air smelling of wet pine and earth. Clara stood near the riverbank, the hem of Eli's old army shirt brushing her knees. The water had calmed, but her heart hadn't. She turned when she heard his boots on the path behind her. "The river's going down," Eli said, stopping a few feet away. His voice was steady, but something in it trembled. She nodded. "I know." Neither spoke for a long time. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was thick with the things they both wanted to say and couldn't. Finally, she looked up at him, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Can I stay a little longer?" It wasn't about the river, and they both knew it. It was about him, about safety, about something that had begun to grow quietly in the ashes of everything they'd lost. Eli's eyes drifted toward the horizon, where the sunlight touched the mountains. "The crossing will be rough for a few more days," he said, his tone gruff. "You can work for your keep. I don't take charity." A small, trembling smile touched her lips. "Then I'll work." And so she stayed. The days turned warm and golden. The rhythm of life settled into something new, something neither of them had felt in years. Clara cooked, mended, planted, and sang softly while she worked. Her voice, though faint, filled the cabin with a strange kind of peace. Eli chopped wood, tended the cattle, and tried not to think too much about the way her laughter made his chest ache. They rarely spoke about the past. They didn't need to. It hung in the room like a ghost they both had learned to live with, but their silences grew softer, less like walls and more like resting places. One afternoon, Eli returned from checking the high pasture and saw her down by the creek, sleeves rolled up, washing clothes in the cold stream. The sunlight danced across her skin, catching in her dark hair. She looked freer than he'd ever seen her, and for a moment, just one, he allowed himself to imagine what it would be like if she never left. Then he saw them, the pale scars that ran down her back like whispers of pain. Faded, but still there. A cold fury rose in him. He turned away, his jaw tight. She didn't see him watching. That night, she found his old war letters in a wooden chest. She wasn't snooping, only tidying. But when he came in and saw them in her lap, she looked up, guilt flashing across her face. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." Eli stared for a long moment. Then he said softly, "They're just words from a man who thought the world could be fixed." "Your brother wrote you," she said quietly, touching one of the envelopes with careful fingers. He sounded proud. Quote, Eli's shoulders stiffened. "He's dead. Died before the fighting even reached him. I told him to stay home. He didn't listen." The silence after that was heavy. Then Clara reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and touched his arm. "You carry him with you," she said. "That's not a curse, Eli. It's proof that you loved him." He looked down at her hand, small, delicate, warm against his scarred skin, and something in him broke open again. "You talk like someone who's had to bury love." She met his gaze and didn't look away. "I have." It was near sunset when everything changed. Clara had gone out riding on Eli's horse, Drum, for the first time since the river. She had looked radiant, hair loose, cheeks flushed, laughing in the wind. Eli watched her disappear down the trail, a smile tugging at his lips. For once, the world had felt right. Then he heard the scream. He ran. Down the ridge, through the brush, his lungs burning. He found the horse trembling near a ravine, reins tangled in the weeds. Clara lay half buried in the loose dirt where the edge had given way. She was struggling to rise, her face streaked with dust and fear. "Clara!" He slid down the slope and pulled her up, his hands running over her arms, her shoulders. "Are you hurt?" "No, just shaken," she said breathlessly. The ground collapsed. He stared at her, his heart hammering. "You could have died." "I'm fine, Eli." He didn't let her finish. He pulled her against him, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Don't do that again," he muttered, his voice breaking. "Don't scare me like that." For a moment she froze. Then her arms slid around him. Her face pressed into his chest. "I'm sorry," she whispered. When he finally pulled back, his hands stayed on her face, his thumbs brushing the dirt from her cheeks. Her lips parted, her breath warm against his skin. The world fell away until there was nothing but the space between them, pulsing like a heartbeat. He leaned closer, then stopped. In her eyes, he saw gratitude, fear, and a hint of something else. Something that made his chest ache. But he also saw the shadow of that first night, the offer she had made out of desperation, the woman who believed her body was all she had to give. He stepped back. The silence between them snapped like a taut rope. She turned away, humiliated. He said nothing. That night, they barely spoke. The fire burned low. The air felt thick with everything unsaid. The next morning, Clara stood before him, her hair loose around her shoulders. Her eyes were wet but steady. "You saved me," she said. "Twice now, you've given me a kindness I don't know how to repay." "There's nothing to repay," Eli said quietly. "Yes, there is," she whispered. She took a trembling breath. "You never let me thank you." Her hands went to the buttons of his old army shirt, the one she wore like armor. Slowly, she began to undo them. The fabric slipped from her shoulders and fell to the floor. The firelight painted her skin in soft gold, and the faint silver scars glimmered like truth itself. "Will you stay this time?" she asked, her voice barely holding together. "Not because I owe you, but because I want you to." Quote. Eli stood frozen, his breath rough. He stepped forward, his hand trembling as he lifted her chin. "I want you, Clara," he said, his voice raw, but not as payment. A tear slid down her cheek. "Then just hold me." He did. And in that quiet, fragile moment, the walls around them, made of guilt, pain, and years of loneliness, finally crumbled. What began as survival had turned into something sacred. Something like love. Weeks later, after all the storms and blood and fear that followed, the accusations, the sheriff, the wound that nearly killed him, they stood together once more beside the Wind River. It flowed calm now, gentle and forgiving. Clara's hand slipped into Eli's. Her voice was steady, her smile soft. "Will you stay now?" she asked. Eli looked at her, at the woman who had walked through fire and come out shining. "Always," he said. And in the light of that Wyoming dawn, the river carried their pasts away, leaving only peace.